Beneath the ordinary world lies a veil, and behind it, the voices of the lost still whisper.
We are your guides into the shadows, where true crime meets the paranormal.
From chilling crimes to haunted histories, we uncover the stories that refuse to rest.
This is Veil of Echoes. Welcome to Veil of Echoes, the podcast where true crime and the unexplained collide, where some stories are buried in history and others never really leave.
Each week, we step into places, cases, and moments that continue to echo long after they should be over. But sometimes, the stories that stay with us the longest aren't the loud ones. Sometimes, they begin quietly. A room that feels wrong, a house that seems to remember, a feeling that settles in before anything has even happened. The kind of fear that builds slowly, patiently, and the kind that lingers in your mind long after the story is over.
Because tonight, we're stepping into the unsettling world of psychological horror, memory, and the fear rooted inside real places.
We're your hosts. I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Bria. Tonight, we're stepping into a story shaped by atmosphere, memory, and the kind of fear that builds slowly over time.
Because sometimes the most unsettling things aren't monsters or violence, or even what we can see. Sometimes it's the feeling that something has been there long before you arrived and may still be waiting after you leave.
Tonight, we're joined by New York Times and international bestselling author J.D. Barker, whose work blends suspense, horror, crime, and the supernatural in a way that feels deeply psychological and immersive. He's the author of the Fourth Monkey trilogy, Forsaken, and several other best-selling novels. And his newest book, There's Something I Keep Upstairs, was inspired by a real haunted house. J.D., thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thanks for having me. I'm sufficiently creeped out now after that intro.
Well, I love that. That's a
Awesome. Thank you.
So before we dive into the book itself, we'd love to start with you for a moment. So you spent much of your career exploring darker themes, stories that sit somewhere between horror and psychological suspense. So what first pulled you toward that kind of storytelling?
Honestly, it was just from reading. When I was a kid, we didn't have a TV in the house, and this was the 70s, so that doesn't mean much. There were like 3 things to watch anyway. But we hit the library from a very early age, and I was reading by the time I was 3. I had read like all the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drews. I don't know if you guys ever played or read those. Then I moved on to like all the classics like Charles Dickens and Mark Twain. But my mom, she owned an antique store, and we used to go to a lot of garage sales. And I remember going to a yard sale one day, and this guy had a box of books, and sitting on top was a copy of Dracula. I was 8 years old and I picked it up, and like I looked at it and like I could just tell by the cover it wasn't something I should be reading just yet. But I showed it to my mom. It was 25 cents. She let me buy it. And I took it home and read it. And honestly, it scared me half to death. Like I slept with the lights on for like 3 weeks. I was checking the closet and under the bed. And that's the first time a book had ever gotten like an emotional reaction out of me. And I think I've been chasing that feeling as a reader and a writer ever since. So when I started writing for on my own, I dove both feet into horror. I loved horror, but I also write thrillers. I bounce back and forth. I didn't want to be pigeonholed in one particular genre as a writer. I wanted to be able to mix it up when I got that inspiration. So I tend to jump around a lot.
Oh, I love that. Yeah,
Awesome.
Dracula's one of my favorites for sure. So that was awesome.
Dracula is a great one.
Yes, definitely.
So was writing always the goal for you, or did that path come like a little bit later on, or...
So when I was growing up, my parents encouraged writing, but they always added this little caveat. They said it's a fantastic hobby, but you can't make a living at it. You have to get a real job. So I just think, you believe everything your parents tell you, so I went off to, finished up high school. I went off to college. I got a couple of degrees and I ended up working in finance. But I would come home and write at night to stay sane. While I was in college, I started stumbling into projects as a book doctor and a ghostwriter, basically helping other people fine tune their manuscripts and get get them published. And that just it turned into a side hustle. So I would do that at night. So I worked about 80 hours a week in the finance industry for 20 some years. But I would come home at night and I would work on these other projects, either helping people fine tune their manuscripts and get them ready for publication. I wrote memoirs for a lot of people. But that's kind of how I stumbled into this whole world. And while I was doing that, I had 6 different books that hit the New York Times bestseller list that I had written that all came out with other people's names on the cover, because that's how it works when you're a ghostwriter. They basically take credit. But when that 6th one hit up, my wife pulled me aside. She said, listen, I know you want to be a full-time author. Let's figure out a way to make this happen. But at this point, we were kind of stuck because I had been working a fairly good job for about 20 some years, had a big salary, but we had the trappings of that. You know, we had a big house, we had cars, we had a boat, so our lifestyle was expensive. So I couldn't just quit the job and walk away because we had to support the lifestyle. So my wife came up with this crazy plan. We sold everything that we owned. We bought a tiny little duplex in Pittsburgh for cash, rented out one side to some tenants, and we moved into the other side. It basically got to the point where we could live off of savings long enough for me to write that first book. That was 11 years ago now, and that's when I first started.
Wow, that's awesome.
That's amazing.
And then look where you are today. That's so cool.
It's been a crazy, wild ride for sure. It's hard to believe it's been 11 years already.
Wow. I know, time just flies, but that's awesome.
That's amazing.
So let's talk about There's Something I Keep Upstairs. So when
Sure.
did this story first start taking shape for you?
Well, like any author, I've got an app on my phone called Ideas, where I just, anytime I get, any kind of inkling of a thing, I write it down in there. I knew I always wanted to write a haunted house book because I've always loved that framework. But I didn't want to write the same story that we've seen over and over again. Like a husband and wife buy a house, they move in, something bad happens, something worse happens. They do some
Right.
research, realize something really bad happened, and then they either fix it or whatever took over the house takes over them. I didn't want to do that. But in researching it, I came up with this tagline. I started looking at the origins of haunted houses, and I came up with this line: for a haunted house to be born, somebody has to die. So I wrote that tagline down in my little list of ideas, and it sat there for years because I wasn't quite sure where to go with it. And during that time, my wife and I, we were living in Pittsburgh. The book started to sell. We realized we don't have to live in Pittsburgh if we don't want to. Ultimately, we landed in New England. We bought a house on a little island off the coast of Portsmouth called Newcastle. And I go for a run every day. I do a lap around the island. And at one point when I cross the beach, if I look out over the water, there's a tiny little island right off our coast, about a quarter mile out. There's only one house on it. And as soon as I saw that house, like out there all by itself in the water, I knew that was the house for my haunted house story. And when those two pieces came together, then, it's basically like peanut butter and chocolate, two very different things, but they come together in the right way.
Oh, yes.
Then I started the book.
Nice. That's amazing.
Nice.
I love
That's
that.
awesome.
Yeah. So what is it? It's a lighthouse, isn't it? Or some sort of, or is it just
No,
like...
its last use was a Coast Guard life-saving station.
Okay.
So the waters in New England, particularly in the winters, get really, really rough. So the Coast Guard used to station people out there, and if a boat got stranded or if they were in trouble, they would launch from that little island off into the ocean to help whoever they could. But it had been abandoned for about 50 or 60 years. So by the time I saw the house, it was falling down. There were bats living inside. There were holes in the roof. It was in horrible shape because nobody had basically done anything with it for 50 or 60 years. I ended up learning that a local guy raised a ton of money. He raised, I think, $7 million to restore it. So I got in touch with him, told him I was planning on writing a book about the island, and we became friends. So while I was writing the book, he was restoring this place. And in today's world, it's actually a museum that you can visit by boat. You can only go certain times of the day, but they'll take you out there on tours. And they actually decorated the interior of the house to match what I had in the book because it was so vested in the book as I was writing it.
That's really cool.
So yeah, it's a wild experience because now when I go out to the house, I literally walk through the rooms from my story.
Oh my gosh.
Right down to, like the pictures on the walls and things like that match up with what I have in the book. So it's
that's
pretty
incredible.
crazy.
That's
Wow,
incredible.
that's incredible.
I love that. That's awesome. I'd love to see it in person
Yes.
someday. That's awesome.
Got to get to New England.
I know.
Oh, yeah.
That's my goal. I love
Totally.
New England. I used to go there all the time with my grandparents growing up. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I love it here.
Yes.
So one thing that really stood out to us while reading was the atmosphere. The fear feels very restrained and patient instead of relying on shock. Why do you think that kind of slow building dreads tends to stay longer with people?
It's my personal favorite when I'm reading a book because the
Hmm.
book kind of gets into you instead of the other way around. I've always gravitated towards that. I mean, I've read everything that Stephen King has ever written. He is extremely good at it. But the story itself, the house, I felt like the house needed to be a character. The island needed to be a character. Just that general atmosphere needs to fold you in. A lot of that, I mean, as a writer, it's a trick that I've learned over the years. Like I tend to provide like less detail when it comes to description and leave as much room as I can for the reader's imagination to fill in those blanks. And when I do that, I think the picture that you actually create in your own mind is way more vivid than what I could actually put down on paper. And I think
Oh,
that's
yeah.
why when you're reading it, it feels like you're in the story.
Hmm. And
Oh,
that's
yeah.
what I love about reading too. That and like songs too. It just like brings you into that place, and it's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, do you think that fear works differently when it's connected to a real place versus something completely fictional?
I think when we read a story that feels like it could actually happen in real life, that's when it gets you. Like I could sit down and read like a zombie apocalypse novel, and it's fun, it's entertaining, but like I don't expect that to happen. But when you read a story like this, I mean, the basis of the story for people listening that haven't read the book yet, a 17-year-old kid inherits this house on a private island. His grandmother passes
Mhm.
away and leaves it to him along with a lot of money. And he does exactly what you would expect any 17-year-old kid to do with their own house on a private island. He turns it into a party place for him and his
Right.
friends. But that gets old after a little while, and somebody raises their hand and says, "Hey, what would it take to turn this into a haunted house?" And they start exactly where you would expect. There's a couple of scary stories, and somebody brings a Ouija board, but you know the tagline for the book, going in for a
Mhm.
haunted house to be born, somebody has to die.
Yep.
So you know where they're all going, but the book itself is all about that journey. So I think just that tagline alone creates that anticipation as a reader. You know something really bad is coming. You don't know what it is, but the build up to it is what gives you that particular feeling.
Yes, I feel the same. I
Yep.
like that too. I
Yep.
feel like they need to make this book into a movie. I thought of that. Reading it would be a really good. It would make a good movie.
It would make a very good movie.
Definitely. So a lot of the fear in this story also feels tied to memory. The idea that places could somehow hold onto what happened there. So do you think places can carry that kind of weight?
Absolutely. So I don't necessarily believe in the paranormal, but I'm smart enough to understand there's a lot I don't understand.
Right.
So like the first time I visited this house, I went out to the island. I knew nothing about it. We went out there by boat, and the guy who was working on it took me inside. And as I was standing in there, like I wanted to get out, like I wanted to leave. Like the hair on the back of my neck was standing up.
Wow.
Like every instinct in my body was saying, "You don't want to be here. This is a bad place." And
Right.
I knew nothing about it. And when I went home, I started to actually research the island. And I learned that some very horrible things that happened out there. Just that I was only able to go back about 400 years, which is a lot of time. But
Yeah.
the things that happened just in that 400 years were terrible. To give you some examples, when yellow fever was running through this area, it became a yellow fever quarantine zone. So if you got yellow fever somewhere in New England, they would take you out to this island and they would leave you there until you got better. Nobody got better. So all these people died out there. During the Spanish-American War, if they captured a vessel off the coast of New England, they would dock it there and they would keep everybody on board until they either died of starvation or disease, and then they would take the boat because that's what they really wanted. They throw the bodies overboard and feed them to the sharks. So like, when you look at it, it's this beautiful house. Like the water is blue, everything looks perfect. It looks like a postcard. But when you start digging in beneath the surface, you realize that it's really a very bad place. So as I was writing this book, I brought in paranormal investigators and took them out to the island. And one theory in particular kept coming up with every group that I brought out there, and that if a lot of people die in a particular place, there's an energy that's released. Like anytime any living thing dies, that energy has to go somewhere. And when it happens in a place like this, like an island, it almost becomes a battery where it absorbs all of that. So if you think about all these, possibly thousands of people that died on or around this island, that energy is trapped there. So I think that's probably what I was feeling.
Oh yeah.
There's been a lot of paranormal sightings out there. There's stories of a little girl running around on the beach that we later tied to somebody that had died here on the mainland.
Oh wow.
And in the 70s, they found 2 bodies buried on the beach. So there's a lot of stories that we know about, but that gets me thinking, like we only know a fraction of what really happened out there. So if we know these 10 things, that means this other 100 over here, we don't know about them yet.
Exactly.
Right.
So yeah, so I think there's something out there. I don't know what it is, but like you can feel it when you go there. Like if we go out there by boat, we bring our dog won't come off the boat. Like
Oh,
it doesn't want to run on the beach. It wants to stay on the boat. It wants to leave. Like, I think there's
yikes.
something there.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know what it
Yeah.
is.
Especially when it comes to animals.
Oh,
They
yeah.
say animals know best.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
often tell, like if people are standing in a room and there's a cat in the room with you and something makes a noise in the corner, like that cat just disappears. It's gone. It doesn't care what it
Right.
was. It's protecting itself. But people are stupid. We will walk over to the corner of the room. We'll start sniffing around. We'll try to figure out what actually made that noise.
Yeah.
So I think what I was feeling when I was out there is some instinctual thing that we as humans have kind of learned to ignore over the years. Like the same instinct that animals have, we've kind of tuned it out instead of doubling down on it because we don't really have any predators anymore. We don't have a need for it. But I think in cases like this, maybe there is a little bit of a need.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Oh,
And
yeah.
like with all the dark things that you said that happened there, like the history, I believe energy can tie to places too. So that's
Oh,
interesting.
100%.
Ah, that's creepy.
Yeah.
So, what do you think makes certain stories stay with us long after we finish them, while others disappear almost immediately?
As a writer, I think it's the characters. I think you get vested enough in those people where, you feel like you know them, you're part of their lives. And, the story ends, but in many cases, their lives continue. So I think our subconscious wonders, what are they doing now? Where are they? What happened after this? I think if you're, any good writer worth their salt, they're going to create that, with a book. I think if you close a book and, and I've done this a million times, I finish up a story and it could be a great story, but, you close that cover, you move on to the next book, and a week later, you can't even remember what the first one was about.
Right.
And I really strive in my writing to create the opposite of that. I want you to think about those characters.
Yes.
I want them to haunt you for a little while.
That's awesome. I love that outlook for sure. So when you did step away from writing this book, what stayed with you most personally? Like how you said it, just like what lingered with you, or what still?
I think it was just the house and the feeling and just not
Mhm.
knowing. We've had it's crazy what's happened since the book came out, because now they actually have tours that go out there. They sell the book. Like we've got a lot of haunted places
That's
in
awesome.
Portsmouth. So there's a lot of like ghost tours and stuff you can go on. All the gift shops have my book.
Oh,
So a
how
lot of people
fun.
will come to town and they'll read the book. Then they want to go out to the island. And like when I go out to the island, I actually, I'll see people out there holding the book. Sometimes they're listening to the audiobook and walking through
How
the house.
cool.
The one thing that really got me is in the story, in order to turn this house into a haunted house, the characters start finding things that were, tied to people that died. And they bring them to the house and they bury them in the basement, in the dirt, hoping to, create this energy that we're all talking about. In real life, people actually started doing that. They started going out to the island, bringing trinkets and things from people that had died and trying to bury them in the real basement.
Wow.
So they had to actually lock the basement to keep the tourists from
Oh
going
my
down
gosh.
there and burying stuff.
Wow.
So it's been a little wild.
Wow, that is crazy.
Yeah.
That's so cool though, having your book in like the gift shops and then seeing people at what you wrote about, and they're that's
Yeah, I mean,
awesome.
I catch them like, when I go on that run every day, you can see it from where I'm at, and a lot of times people are out there taking selfies with the house in the bit, behind them as I run by.
Oh, how cool.
And I never introduce myself because like
Right.
it seems like it would be really weird. Like,
Right.
they'd probably be thrilled to meet me for a second, but then it gets awkward. Like
Right,
what are we
like,
going to
well,
talk about?
That's
Like,
awesome.
do you have any questions about the book? Like it's just
Exactly.
so
Like,
Right.
hey, by the
yeah,
way, since
it's
I'm
more
here.
fun just to watch them and know they're there.
Oh, definitely. That's awesome. That would be a great experience, actually.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
So, when readers finish There's Something I Keep Upstairs, what do you hope lingers with them the longest?
I think probably the main character, the one telling us the story.
Mhm.
Because I almost feel like it's not done, and like part of me wants to write a sequel to it.
Oh, that would be
I
awesome.
kept pushing for this book. Like when I was writing it, I wanted to tie it all up, and I wanted it to have a positive ending. But like the characters' actions, and ultimately, like they dictate what the story is about. Their
Mhm.
actions took it into a very dark place, and like that felt right, for the story. I could try to force it into another direction, but it didn't feel right. But it does feel unfinished to me. So I think at some point
Yes.
I might have to go back and write a sequel to that.
Well,
that would be
I think you
amazing.
should. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Definitely.
It was a really good book.
I know. I don't know if you've heard our podcast, but like Mondays we do true crime cases, and then Fridays we do paranormal cases. But once we get this edited and everything, we're gonna release a paranormal episode over
Oh, cool.
Yeah, the life-saving station. So that's awesome, like, with some of those stories you mentioned, like the ghost girl and stuff. It's good to know.
Very interesting to know that people try to go and do their own little
Yeah.
rituals with burying their own little
Yeah.
trinkets.
Oh yeah.
It's crazy. So before we wrap up, we also saw the announcement of the first Scarlet Door.
Oh,
It's the beginning of your new prequel series in the Fourth Monkey universe. So what are you most excited for readers to experience with this new chapter, and what do you want them to know?
I had a lot of fun with that series. The original book, it's called The Fourth Monkey,
Mm-hmm.
and very similar to the haunted house thing. Like I knew I wanted to write a serial killer novel, but I wasn't quite sure what the story was going to be about. And then I came up with this crazy twist to it. So at the beginning of The Fourth Monkey, he's been operating in Chicago for 5 years. The police, they know his MO. He kidnaps a victim, he cuts off their ear, and he mails it to the person's family in a little white box tied with a black string. He's been doing this over and over again, but they don't know who he is. They don't have any evidence and nothing to basically track him down. So at the beginning of The Fourth Monkey, we've got a guy who's crossing the street in Chicago, walking to a mailbox, about to mail a white box tied with a black string, and he gets hit by a city bus and killed. So the police know that they've got their serial killer. They still don't know who he is, but they know that he's got a victim out there somewhere, and they need to find her before her time runs out. So that's where the ticking clock comes into play for a story like this. But in order to tell this story, my serial killer was dead from the beginning of the book, so I needed to come up with a way to basically bring this person into the story. So in order to do that, I wrote a diary. So during the police procedural portion of the book, we flash back to diary entries that basically take you into the past of this killer as a child and a teenager, and we basically see him growing up and some of the things that shaped him into becoming what he later became. It was these little glimpses, but I did that through the original trilogy, and these books came out about 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I was done, after that. I thought the trilogy I felt wrapped itself up nicely. But the books have just garnered this huge following all around the world. Like they
Yes.
keep hitting bestseller lists, even though they've been out for 10 years in new places. And whenever I go somewhere, people, basically tell me they want to know more about the killer. They want more of that
Mhm.
backstory, those diary entries. So when COVID hit, I decided I was going to try something different. So rather than write one of the books, that I was supposed to write under contract, I wrote 3 prequels to this trilogy. And I didn't tell anybody I was working on it because I really wanted to see how it was going to come out.
Right.
So, and it was kind of refreshing to not have to answer to agents and editors as I was working on a particular project. And if I came up, I was on book 3 and I came up with something that needed to happen in book 1, I was able to go back and make those changes and basically get all 3 books perfect before I shared them with anybody. So that's kind of how it came about. It was an experiment. So the first Scarlet Door is basically a glimpse. It starts right where we left our main characters, where we left off with them, and it fills in a 15-year gap between him as a child and the Fourth Monkey killer. Like we basically learn how we went from being this kid to a serial killer.
Oh, wow. That's
Wow,
awesome.
I like
I
that.
know I have the Fourth Monkey series. I need to pick up their new one, though. That's exciting. It sounds really good.
I
It's
like that.
coming out in September. I was going to
Perfect.
release all
Perfect
3 on
timing.
this. Yeah, I was going to release all 3 on the same day. And I figured that would just be fun because nobody's ever done that before.
Yeah, it's different.
I've got my own imprint at Simon and Schuster, so like domestically I could do that. But when
Yeah.
we started talking to all my foreign publishers, they all pushed back. They said they needed
Mm.
time in between the different books. So it's going to be
Right.
roughly about 6 months or so between each title as they come out.
Oh, well, that's good, though. That's exciting.
Awesome.
Fall time.
Yeah.
Well, I know what I'm going to be picking up to
Heck
read.
yeah.
So, and then I was just curious. So I know with the Fourth Monkey series, like it's like with the serial killer like version versus your other one about the haunted house. Like which ones, I mean, just being as author, like which one's your favorite like perspective that you've
I really love writing horror. I love the
Yeah.
scary stuff.
That's
But like,
awesome.
when you read my thrillers, I incorporate a lot of horror elements into it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I when I first started writing books, I was scared half to death that I would get stuck in the same pattern I had seen with some friends of mine. They write a book, it sells really well, and all of a sudden they have to write that same book but different every year for the next
Right.
20 years. I didn't want to do that. So like if you look at the way I published novels, like my first one was a horror novel. The second one was The Fourth Monkey, so we've got a thriller. My third
Mhm.
one, I wrote a prequel to Dracula for Bram Stoker's family. So
Yes,
we're
that's
back into horror. Then I did another thriller. So I purposely bounced back and forth between both worlds. And the readers luckily have come along for the ride. But as a writer, that allows me to keep it fresh because I think if I had to write the same stuff over and over again, I would get bored with it. And,
exactly.
it just
Right.
wouldn't be enjoyable for anybody.
No.
But, with what I'm doing, I'm able to just jump around and kind of write what I want when I want.
Exactly. exactly. And that gives you like all these other options, which I like too. Like you need variety, you know.
Yeah.
Love it. Yeah. Yeah, they've been really good, what I've read so far. That's
Yeah.
exciting. And then how you were with Bram Stoker's grandson, right? Was that it was
His great grandnephew. Yeah.
yeah,
So,
grandnephew. Okay.
yeah,
That's
for
awesome.
Forsaken, my very first novel, it was up for a best debut horror novel. And when I was at the conference, Dacre Stoker, who's Bram's great grandnephew, pulled me aside and he said, "Listen, my family, read your first book. We're familiar with your history as a ghostwriter and a book doctor. We've been trying to find somebody to write a prequel to Dracula for a while now using Bram's original notes.
That's
Is that something
awesome.
you'd be interested in doing?" The answer to that is yes. You always say yes when somebody asks you a crazy
Exactly.
question like that.
Right, definitely.
And like he literally had like everything that was on Bram Stoker's desk when he wrote the original Dracula. And we
Oh,
used
that's
all of that
awesome.
material when we wrote this one. It was a lot of fun.
I bet. And actually, that's kind of
Wow.
ironic too, like how you picked up that, like when you were a
Yeah,
kid.
that book keeps
That's
coming
kind of
back, and and it's one of those things. I read it as a kid. I probably read it 4 or 5 different times
That's
as an adult,
awesome.
and every time I do, I pick up something new, from it.
It just
Great
keeps bringing
Expectations
you
is
back
another
to
one.
it. Yeah, that's
Yeah, like I'm a
awesome.
huge fan of Great Expectations, and
Yes.
that's the same kind of thing. Every time I read it, I get something new out of it.
Oh, that's so cool. All right. Yep.
That is
Isn't
awesome.
it? Yeah. I love that. Well, JD, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us tonight. This was generally such a very incredible experience. And then for our listeners.
Yeah, so for our listeners who want to check out your books and keep up with everything you're working on, where is the best place for them to find them?
The easiest place to find out anything is jdbarker.com. I'm on all the social medias at jdbarker, and the books can be found pretty much anywhere.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Well, we'll be sure to link everything in the show notes so our listeners know where they can find you easily.
All right.
But this has been a very great experience. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit with us and tell us
Oh,
your
thanks for having me.
fun
I appreciate it.
stories.
Yeah, seriously, thank you again for being with us here tonight. You're always 100% welcome back on Veil of Echoes. We would love it.
Definitely.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I can't wait to hear the paranormal episode you're going to
I
pair with this
know.
one.
We'll keep Kate or whoever updated too, like just so you know, heads up, so you can listen
Perfect.
to it if you want. So, yeah. But thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
thank you,
you.
thank you.
All right, JD. Well, you take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye.